So I just finished my workout. I'm a little tired and not super coherent. You know, after you lift super heavy, you just can't form sentences super easily. It's not as easy as when you're super rested, but I'm gonna do my best here and try to make this video on bulking versus cutting. So I feel like most every gym bro is in a constant state of bulking, or they're either bulking or they're cutting. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with bulking and cutting. It's just that a lot of people do bulking and cutting really incorrectly and in really unhealthy ways. So the usual routine, or the popular routine that most bodybuilders do for gaining muscle is bulking. So bulking is when you consume a lot of macronutrients, calories in excess, and you hope to pack on as much muscle mass and other mass as possible. I feel like a lot of people, especially like beginners in the gym, for example, take bulking super seriously. Like everyone on like Instagram, Facebook, they're posting about, oh, I'm gonna bulk up, get to a good size, get a good amount of muscle, then I'm gonna cut back down and get super shredded, get abs, right? This is ridiculously popular, but it's not the most effective way to do things. And it's also not really healthy. An example of an athlete that does this would be the Gymshark sponsored athlete, Uzoma Obalar. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce his name, but in the off season, I'll throw a picture up on the screen. This guy just absolutely balloons up to a huge size. Like this guy's probably like 15-20% body fat in these pictures. Obviously bulking, cutting, this guy does it. It does work for him. However, doing a really solid bulking / cutting cycle is really unhealthy when it's taken at the very extremes, and it's really not the best way to put on and keep quality muscle. So going through like bulking, and cutting cycles leads to like yo-yo dieting. It leads to binge eating. For example, you see this a lot in competition. So when I was doing bodybuilding shows, I might still do some, but when I was doing bodybuilding shows, you'd have a lot of these guys who would just get super overweight in the off season. We're talking about like, their competition weight should be 185, but they're like 215, 220, because they're bulking up, right? Bulking up to put on muscle. And when their show comes around the corner, they start cutting. And these guys are absolutely miserable. I've competed with some of these guys. One of the guys I competed with, he dropped like 20, 30 pounds in like it wasn't all fat, it was muscle as well and a lot of water weight, but dropped like 20 pounds. Super miserable, super cranky. And for my show that I did, I'll be honest with you guys, I wouldn't say I bulked. I'll get to that in a minute. I'll get to that in a minute. But for my show, I think I dropped about maybe 8-9 pounds, maybe 10 at the most. I think it was like between 10 and 7 pounds for my bodybuilding show that I did. And here's what I look like on the stage. But I never did really do a strong bulk or cutting cycle. Again, this is a really popular misconception that you have to bulk up and become the size of elephant balloon in order to put on muscle. Like, maybe it's because a lot of people on like Instagram do it. A lot of popular bodybuilders are like, oh, I'm gonna go on my bulk. And yeah, eating a lot of food is really important. You just don't have to be a fat ass. I'm not saying bulking and cutting is super wrong. It's just that you don't have to be fat. You don't have to be in a high caloric surplus. In fact, you don't even have to be in a caloric surplus to put on muscle. So bulking is not really healthy and maintainable, mainly because when you start cutting aggressively, it is really not healthy mentally too. Like I never really had an eating disorder before going to bodybuilding, but before one of the shows I did, I just want to eat everything. And I only was cutting like 3 weeks out, okay? So after the show, I kind of had a rebound effect, which is popular among a lot of competitors, and I gained like 5 pounds. It wasn't a lot. It was only like 5, 6, 7 pounds, but instead of being like my usually 191 in the off season, I was like 196. But that's just for me, a guy that really doesn't bulk extremely. For a lot of these competitors, as soon as they finish their show, their mind is just so screwed up about food because they're cutting so aggressively, they're restricting themselves, that they just go on a total binge. They eat everything. Some of these guys gain like 20, 30, maybe like 25, 30 pounds of water weight in fat. So as far as cutting is concerned, cutting is very simple. Cutting means you're in a caloric deficit and you're trying to burn your fat stores. Also, something else I wanted to add, and when you're like 10 to 15, 20% body fat, losing that extra amount of fat can be super challenging, like really, really hard. So in the end, was bulking really worth it? So obviously I wouldn't make this video without coming up for an alternative to extreme bulking, bulking and cutting. So I feel like, hopefully this is kind of a duh for you, but a lot of people don't know that you can build muscle without being in a substantial caloric surplus. In fact, you can actually build muscle while being in a caloric deficit. There have been a lot of studies on this. As long as you're consuming adequate amounts of protein, you will lose fat and continue to build muscle while in a caloric deficit. All right, I'm just repeating myself for the sake of rhetoric. So I first started working out. I never really did a bulk. So I would eat, sometimes I would be in a deficit, but I would never get or gain any significant body fat. I was basically ripped year around, but I would still gain muscle. So yeah, I know, I was shredded year round and I was putting on muscle. I did get a lot of like steroid comments from family, friends, people at the gym, people in my fraternity, but like I'll make a video on this as well. Never did any steroids, and you may be thinking like there's not just steroids. I know there's steroids, pro-hormones, and there are SARMs. Never did any of those. And I was putting on muscle year round while in a deficit a good portion of the time and while having my six pack. You can build muscle in a caloric deficit. I've done it. A lot of people have done it. You can do it. So again, going through extreme bulking and cutting cycles is just pure stupidity right off the bat. However, this doesn't mean you should just cross your fingers, go into a extreme caloric deficit and pray you put on muscle, okay? Like if you are overweight, you can put on muscle and lose fat at the same time. I'm probably repeating myself a million times in this video, but the most important thing to do is make sure you're consuming enough protein, all right? Because in order for you to actually put muscle on your body, you need to actually stimulate your muscle tissues. You need to be working out. Working out stimulates mTOR gene activation, which then stimulates muscle protein synthesis. Muscle protein synthesis cannot happen without plenty of protein. All right, so now we've gotten most of the bulking and the cutting out of the way. I quickly want to address bulking and cutting in quarantine. So I feel like not everyone, but I feel like a good percentage of people in quarantine right now, people who lift, bodybuilders, powerlifters, what have you, are either they're bulking or they're cutting. And I'm gonna tell you guys why doing either of those things is actually pretty stupid to do in quarantine. So let me start with number one, with bulking. Okay, bulking. This is why you shouldn't bulk in quarantine. You're not going to the gym as much. Your energy expenditure is low, okay? The whole theory, hypothesis behind bulking is that you're in a caloric excess to put on muscle. What's required to build muscle? You've got to work out those muscles, right? And you got to eat a ton of food. If you're not working out as much, there's literally no point in bulking. There's like literally no point. You're not going to be building a lot of muscle because you don't have a lot of access to the gym. Maybe you can do at-home workouts, but again, like right now, I'm probably working out 2 to 3 times a week. When I was doing a kind of a dirty bulk, when I was bulking, like I said, I wasn't in an extreme bulk, but I was bulking. I was working out probably 5-6 times a week. When you're in quarantine, don't bulk. So as far as cutting is concerned, cutting in quarantine, again, I don't know why you'd want to cut in quarantine, okay? When you are in a caloric deficit, the purpose is you want to maintain or increase your muscle mass while losing fat. Okay, that's the entire premise behind being in a caloric deficit. Losing fat, preserving your lean muscle tissue, and even adding on to that lean muscle tissue. So if you aren't working out a lot and you are in a caloric deficit, your muscles are most likely going to atrophy just a little bit. So if you are in a caloric deficit and you aren't working out a lot, which means you aren't stimulating your muscle fibers at a minimum once a week sufficiently, this is just straight thermodynamics. If you're not really using it and your body needs energy, you are gonna burn muscle along with your fat. So cutting in quarantine is just really not, or cutting when you're not working out is probably the least productive thing you could do as far as building your physique and increasing your strength is concerned. So if you can't bulk in quarantine and you probably shouldn't cut, those two things, what should you do? You know, my personal advice is that you should be at maintenance calories and be consuming, really make sure you're consuming adequate amounts of protein. That way you're not getting super fat and you're also not burning muscle. So I think that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, guys.